Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about few things that you should do when you attend an interview. Many times it so happens that we put in so much of energy, effort and practice for the interview, but then we ignore some of the very common points that would make a lasting impact on the interviewer. So let's try to cover some of those basic things and the core tips that you should keep in mind when you are going for an interview. And these tips are not very MBA specific, so you can apply these tips for any general interview, or if you have a job interview coming up, so you can still apply the same tips and things that you should keep in mind when you are in the interview. Okay, so let's cover the basic things to keep in mind first, right? So the basic things for interview are, like dress for success. This is pretty common. So you have to dress for success. You have to dress as if you are already having that position. If you are applying for a business school, then you have to come out as if you are already prepared to be part of that business school. Okay, so you have to dress for success. And second basic tip is that be respectful and engage with the interviewer. Okay, so look like you are participating in the conversation. Okay, and be authentic. So the third tip is be authentic. So you have to be natural, okay, and you have to bring your true self at the table and talk about what are your key strengths, what are your weaknesses, and why you are a really good fit for a business school or for a position that you are applying for. Fourth tip is, show enthusiasm and bring in some energy in the interview. So this point might not seem very important, but it is actually very important to keep the attention of the interviewer. You have to be enthusiastic and you have to bring in that energy in your responses, in your answers, and that cheerfulness should be there in order to retain the attention of the interviewer, and that is very important. I have seen so many candidates lose out on this point just because they are unable to engage with the interviewer and keep the attention of the interviewer intact throughout the interview. The last basic tip that you have to keep in mind is that you should come across as a positive person, right? So you have to show that positive attitude, energy, and your overall outlook should come across as a positive. Now let's get on to the more serious and core tips that you should keep in mind when you attend an interview. Number one tip is be present in the interview discussion. So you should bring your whole self to the interview. This requires some sort of training to get into that mindset wherein you just focus entirely on the interview discussion, and it automatically shows to the interviewer that you are someone who is engaging thoroughly and you are there in the discussion with your whole self and not just physically, right? And see, what's important is that when interviewer asks you a question, so it's not just about how you respond. The answer that you give is just one part. The other parts are your body language, your tone that you use, right? And how energetically are you answering that question. So there are a few other parts that form overall as a whole that form your answer to the question. So you have to be present. And the second point that happens when you are present in the conversation is that you become an active listener. So you try and understand what the interviewer is asking for, what exactly is he looking for, and then you cater towards the questions that the interviewer is most interested in. Okay, so you have to be present in the interview. It's very important. Because I have seen in my experience, so I have seen so many candidates, so when you ask them a simple question, they, rather than answering to that specific question, which might take about, between 1 minute to 2 minutes, they spend 10 minutes answering something entirely different. So which I was not even looking for. So that really shows that the candidate is not being present in the interview, right? And they are losing time. So because the interviews are fixed for a certain duration. As an interviewer, I would really love to hear all the stories, everything that candidate wants to talk about, but then there is a time constraint here, right? And in order to keep a level playing field, so every candidate is given the same amount of time, about 30 minutes or 45 minutes, depending on the criteria. Okay, so being present saves you a lot of time, makes your interview overall very effective, and in the end, it leaves a good impression on the interviewer. Now, second big tip is, so be clear on the story. You must have done a good amount of work in reaching the interview stage already, right? So by working on your essays, by thinking through your stories, by really introspecting around some of the basic questions, such as, why you want to do an MBA, what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals, and why are you applying for this particular business school. So you must have already gone through that thought process and getting that thought clarity, and spending good amount of time thinking deeply around such questions, core questions of your MBA application. But then when you finally reach this interview stage, don't just ignore the fact that it's one thing to write down your answers after going through that thought process and thought exercise, and it's entirely different to actually articulate those answers in front of an interviewer. Okay, so you have to spend good amount of time in being clear on your story. So practice with your friends, do rehearsal, record your voice, or maybe take video and see how your answers are coming across. How much time are you spending in answering some of the basic questions, such as why you want to do an MBA, and what's your career aspirations. So where do you see yourself in next 3 years or next 5 years time. Okay, so do continuous practice in order to be very clear. Like, you have to be solid clear on your stories. That gives you an ability to structure your thoughts in the interview. Okay, and that is very important, because if you fail to structure your thoughts properly when you are talking about an experience, an impact experience that you have had at your work, or maybe an initiative that you have led outside your work, then you end up wasting a lot of time, because a structured story might take anywhere between 5 minutes to hardly maybe 6 minutes if it's a long story. But then if you do not follow the structure, first of all, it's very difficult for the interviewer to follow through your rambling, right? Then second point is that it just takes up a lot more time than a structured story. So in order to be efficient, you have to structure your story very well. Now, third tip that you should follow when you attend an interview is steer the discussion in the area that you want to highlight. Now, this might sound very tactical, but it does give you bonus points in the interview. Okay, and this requires you, first of all, to be present, fully engaged in the interview, and then think about what are the areas in your application that you want to highlight and focus. So it can be your work experience, so all the things that you have done at your work, your career progression, the impact you have made at work and everything, right? It could also be things you have done outside the work in your volunteer capacity. So maybe you were associated with an NGO, or maybe you have yourself launched an initiative and you have got some really good outcome to talk about. And so basically this requires you to drive the interview, right? So not just follow the questions, but also leave key details and then make interviewer curious to find out those details and ask the follow-up questions. This gives you bonus points if you manage to steer the discussion in the area that you want to highlight in the interview. Fourth point to keep in mind when you attend an interview is know when to stop. Okay, it's super important, because so the question might be very basic. It might just start with tell me about yourself. And this is a question which is so open-ended that you can answer this question in either 1 minute, or you can go on up to 10 minutes as well. But then you should know when to stop. And again, I think this goes back to our first point of being present in the interview. Like, you should really know when to stop, when to finish your answer. And in my experience of taking interviews, I have seen so many candidates who just miss the point when they answer, right? And that informs me that the candidate is not fully engaged in the discussion. Be very, very careful about what is the question, what exactly is the interviewer looking for, and just answer to the question and then stop, so that the interviewer can ask you other follow-up questions, and if the interviewer is interested to find more information about that one answer, then they will ask you the follow-up question, right? So don't divulge all the information, everything that you have done on that one project, and use up most of your interview time to just talk about that one experience and one project. It doesn't give you a lot many points. Okay, so basically you have to come up with a game plan for how you want to spend the 30 minutes of your interview discussion. Now, last point that you should keep in mind when you go for an interview is, at the end, when you are given a chance to ask any questions to the interviewer, you should be curious. Yeah, you should come out as a curious person who has done their homework, who has done the research of the business school or the company where they have applied for a job, and ask genuine questions that shows curiosity. Don't ask any question for which you can find an answer online. That just shows that you have not put in enough effort to find information about the business school or the company. Okay, So your questions should show that you are, you have that curiosity and you have that inquisitiveness to really dig deeper and look at things critically and ask questions. So you need not have to come with the most genius out of the box question for the interview, right? So it's not about that. So it should be both ways. So you should ask questions that also helps you, that also informs you in the overall application about the business school. So for example, you can ask business school about how they are adjusting to the new normal, what has changed because of this pandemic, how is the remote education system working, and how do you see the future going forward. So these are a few things that you should keep in mind when you are going for an interview. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have an interview coming up, then all the best, and put in a lot of work, do practice, rehearse your interview answers, spend some time in giving mock interviews, and also go through some of the points that I have discussed. I'm sure these tips will come in handy. And once again, all the best for your interview. If you find this video helpful, please do like this video and share with your friends who also have interviews coming up. Subscribe to my channel. I make videos for MBA coaching and career development. If you have any ideas, or if you want to share a few tips that really helped you in your interview, do share with all of us in the comments section below. So I hope you found some helpful tips or advice in this video. Please share your thoughts, questions or suggestions in the comments section below. Once again, please click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon if you haven't already done so. Thank you.